event. My name is Justin Levy. I'm the director of social and influencer marketing at Demandbase, and today I am fortunate to be joined by our actual CMO, Mr. John Miller. John, can you give an introduction to our attendees?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining. So yeah, I am currently the CMO here at Demandbase. I've been with the company for a little over 2.5 years and have been kind of one of the architects of really, I think, helping to create the new Demandbase, which we can talk about a little bit later. I joined when we merged the company that I had founded called Engagio with Demandbase back in June of 2020. Engagio was also an ABM platform, and we realized that the combination of Engagio plus Demandbase Classic would create, truly the most complete ABM platform out there. As I said, CMO Demandbase, previously CEO at Engagio. I was with Engagio for about 5 years, and before that, as some of you may know, I'm probably best known as one of the co-founders and the first CMO at Marketo, which we started back in 2006, and I really helped to, build our go-to-market, our secret sauce, all that kind of stuff at Marketo. Love content marketing. I've been using content marketing to build companies and brands pretty much since the beginning of my career. And I love MarTech because I've been in MarTech pretty much my whole career.
So one of the questions that we typically ask at the beginning of these, and actually was a question when we went to go source questions from the community, is debunk a myth for us.
Yeah, debunk a myth. I want to debunk a myth about attribution. Attribution shows up at the top of marketers' wish lists and wants kind of all the time. And it makes sense because the promise of attribution is so seductive. You can use this concept of attribution, and you're going to be able to measure the ROI of everything that you do and use it to really prove your impact and justify your budget. So I think that's actually a myth. Attribution is at best a useful tool to help you build a model that gives you guidance about what works and doesn't work. There are so many assumptions built into any attribution model, starting with which touches do you actually include? Are you including every touch? What about website visits? What about email nurtures? What about things that the SDRs are doing, your sales team is doing, right? If you're not including every possible thing, you're not getting a full view of attribution. What about stuff that's happening in dark communities, off your website, and social? If you're not tracking all that, you're not perfect attribution. And even if you had the ability to track everything perfectly, you're still going to make an assumption about how you allocate things, whether it's first touch or last touch or equal touch or somehow weighted or whatnot. And so to sort of do the math and come back and say, this thing generated 119% ROI, that's a false precision, right? You just can't use it for that level of proof. What you can use attribution for, though, is to build a model that tells you, with these assumptions that I've made, it seems like this thing works better than that thing. So I should do more of this and less of that. So in a nutshell, my recommendation is use attribution to improve your ROI, not prove your ROI.
Do you think, so a question from me, not one that came in through the community, but okay, do you think that changes with scale in company? And so what I mean is, when I've talked to smaller companies about dark social, they rely on self-attribution, right? Because they only have 10 or 15 or 20 employees. So to force self-attribution on, say, a form fill or something like that, it becomes easier because of their size company. But in my opinion, when you scale, that doesn't scale as well. So attribution as a whole, does that myth that you debunked still hold from any scale company?
I do think so. And I mean, maybe, if you're a startup, your first 10 customers, you can probably figure out exactly where they came from, right? So, but pretty early on, I think it becomes something that you'll never truly know all the touches. Even if you put on a form saying, hey, where'd you hear about us, or something like that, you're still going to get one view, right? One piece of the overall puzzle. Because even if that's where they quote unquote heard about you, there's probably other impressions and things that were going on along the way also.
Yeah. One thing that we talk about, I know internally, and there's content all over the place, depending on where you go, about is why is sales and marketing alignment so vital for B2B success?
I like to answer this one with a little bit of a sports analogy, especially as we're all sitting thinking about the World Cup going on. Back in my Marketo days, the analogy that we used for marketing and sales was a relay race or a relay team, where marketing would generate a lead and then hand it to the SDR or a salesperson, who then, if it's an SDR, then hand it to the salesperson. Maybe you close it and you hand it to an account manager or a CSM, et cetera. This is sort of linear process. And where sales and marketing alignment kicked in was you had to get good at the handoffs. You had to make sure you don't fumble that baton pass. And that was important. And yet it was probably overly simplistic, that model. Maybe it worked back in the days when buying was somewhat linear, something that could be purchased by a single person, it might work. But when we get into like today's mean streets of B2B and the complex buying journeys, the process is much more nonlinear. There's multiple players involved, and it moves forward and it moves backwards. And that sort of simple linear relay race analogy falls down. I think a much better analogy for marketing and sales working together is a soccer, or for those of you on the other side of the Atlantic, or frankly, the rest of the world, a football team, where we've got players in different positions. Marketing, maybe the halfbacks, sales might be the forwards, but they work together as a team and they pass the ball back and forth. If you look at the journey the ball takes towards the goal, it's very nonlinear. But ultimately it's the effectiveness of how well that team works together that determines whether or not you score and win. So, in B2B today, it really is a single revenue team. And that team has to work together. It goes back to what I was saying a minute ago about attribution. There's no such thing as a marketing sourced lead. There's no, marketing source deal. There's marketing touches probably pretty much every deal. And frankly, you want sales and SDRs involved in helping to create the pipeline in the first place, because you've got people with different skills and different capabilities. And when you can collaborate effectively, that's how you're going to really perform the best. So B2B teams.
Now, just a reminder to those that have started out with us or just tuning in, if you have questions for John, please drop them into the chat. We'll get fed them so John can answer them. But as we approach 2023, we're whatever we are, 3 weeks out or so, what are 3 areas that B2B companies should be focused on? The ones that you're talking to right now, or, that you're thinking about?
Yeah, well, just literally playing off the last question, I think every B2B company needs to be thinking about how well their sales and marketing teams are working together. There's a couple of just kind of, frankly, things that aren't that hard that make, to me, a real impact on how well sales and marketing work together. I'll run through those kind of just really quickly, and then I'll give you the other 2 areas people should focus. The first one has to do with, to me, defining what I call your entitlements for how you're going to treat different kinds of accounts. This is a document that literally puts on paper, hey, if we mutually agree that this is a tier 1 target account, this is what it means. Marketing will do these things. Sales will do these things. SDRs will do these things. and you have triggered entitlements. If a tier 1 account does X, then we will do these following things. And you write this entitlement document. And then that becomes your contract for how sales and marketing are going to work together. In some ways, if you want to cross sports analogies, it's your playbook for this team. And how are you going to literally work together and run the plays? The other thing the entitlements document lets you do is it lets you know how many accounts you can have. Because you've written down and say, well, tier 1 account gets this, you're going to realize pretty quickly, well, gosh, I can only support 10 of those or 20 of those or whatever the right number is. And that saves you from the problem of picking too many accounts and therefore being less effective. So step 1, define your entitlements. Step 2, sales should own the account picking process. So marketing should guide the process with data and intelligence. At Demandbase, we give each rep, we're literally wrapping this process up for 2023 right now. We give each rep a spreadsheet that has all the accounts that they own in their territory. Each one scored with a variety of firmographic, technographic, intent, engagement scores, things like that. And then we're sort of guiding the rep saying, hey, we think these are the good ones. These are not the good ones. But given that scoring and the entitlements document, they can now go in and pick, okay, I get 3 tier 1s based on the entitlements document. Looking at this data, I'm going to pick these 3. And because marketing is guiding the process with the data, but sales is owning it, sales is really bought in. Then what you do is you run stand-ups, and the stand-up is kind of like in American football, the huddle before the play runs.
Yep.
And it's a meeting with marketing and sales getting together and, literally talking about that rep's accounts. Hey, what's going on at your tier 2s this week? And what plays are we going to be running to achieve our goals with that account? And then last but not least is making sure that all the metrics are aligned. And we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get later, but that you don't want marketing and sales looking at different metrics. So that's number 1 for 2023. Really think about your sales and marketing alignment. And I just blew pretty quickly through some really key things you can do, and happy to expand on those if people want. For 2023, I think 2 other major areas that we're thinking about at Demandbase, and I think other companies should be focusing on. First is efficiency as a necessity. There's no doubt that, especially for people in technology, financial services, other industries, whether we're in a full recession or not, we are definitely facing tighter budgets. And I can pretty much almost guarantee that everyone on the call is going to be asked to do more next year with either the same or fewer resources. The classic do more with less. So how do you do more with less, right? It's not going to be by working harder. I know how hard people are working out there, and if anything, burnout's a problem. So if we're not going to work harder, how do we do more with less? Well, we're going to have to do it by working smarter. And that comes down to being more focused on the things that really matter, on the accounts that really matter, using intelligence, frankly, account intelligence to be more effective. Then the third trend that I think is pretty important for companies in 2023 is the continued rise of the self-service buyer. And there's lots of stuff written out there as Gen Z and millennials move into being more and more the decision makers. We're seeing, ever more buyers who want to do significant or all parts of the buying process without having to interact with a salesperson. And that has some pretty profound changes for B2B go-to-market. For one, salespeople really want to be thinking about how do you become a concierge, a guide, a trusted resource, in the process, because that's kind of what the buyers are wanting. But the whole revenue team, including marketing, should be thinking about how can I enable the self-service buyer, give them as much information as they want. I'll just use a simple example. My wife at her company was looking to purchase some software to help manage e-commerce returns. And she went to, she did the research, found who are the top vendors, and she went to a couple different vendors. And, on one site, one of the leading companies, there was no information about pricing. She didn't know if this was going to be in her ballpark or not, or how complex it was to set up. So she filled out a form saying, hey, can somebody contact me? Somebody did, I think, a couple hours later, and they scheduled a meeting for like 2 days after that. In the meantime, my wife went to another company, saw pricing on the website, saw she could hit a button and sign up and start using the darn thing. And she was live and running on this other product before the call with the other company even ever got scheduled. And that's happening across B2B. So we need to be thinking about, no matter what you sell, right? I mean, you can't, Demandbase is a complicated enterprise software. I should be clear, not more complicated than anything else, but it's, we're talking about serious enterprise software. It's not something you're just going to click a button on our website and get up and running on, but at the same time, can we make our pricing more transparent? Can we really provide the tools buyers need to understand what getting up and running looks like, how it's going to work in their organization, what do they need to do? Answering all these buyers' questions in a self-service manner. Can they touch the product, feel the product? The more we can lean into that, I think the better.
When you talk about entitlement, so kind of what you mentioned in the first one, your first tip, can you go just a bit deeper on that? Do you mean like gifts? Do you mean one-to-one touch, maybe from like a C-suite? What do you mean kind of by the word entitlement if you only have that select 3, 5, 10 accounts?
Sure. No, that's a good question. So it can mean anything really. So for us, entitlements cover what kind of data are we going to collect about the account? Are we going to build an account plan? Are we going to purchase contact information? In our case, we have our own data. We use Demandbase to get the contacts, so we're not paying when we purchase them. But how much contacts are we going to build for the account? How often are we going to update and maintain that data? So the whole data side of things. Yep. What are we going to invest in advertising on a monthly budget per account based on the tier? There's going to be things around gifting and direct mail and all that kind of stuff. There's things around kind of high value offers and, one-to-one meetings with me or Chris Moody, our head of thought leadership, or our executives, invitations to an executive briefing center, invitations to exclusive events. On the sales side, there's things around, again, account planning, how often an SDR reaches out to how many personas, how quickly, et cetera, et cetera. If anybody's listening, send me an email or just message on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to share an example of Demandbase's entitlements that we're actually using with you. So that's probably also just the best way to get in touch with me.
Great. Question from the LinkedIn Live from Leo. He asks, what is the best way to start content marketing for someone who is a tiny consulting group of only 2 to 3 people?
Content marketing really, I think, needs in many ways to come from some passion. So if you're a consulting group, presumably you're an expert on something because you're consulting to people about it. So I would hope that you have some passion in your area of expertise. And so it can just start with sharing some of your expertise in that passion. Back in my day, when I was at Marketo a long time ago, that was by writing blog posts, and that was how you kind of put it out there. And I think that can still matter. I wrote these big definitive guides, these books, 200 page plus, which, to me were really valuable because not only were they great pieces of content, they sort of served as foundation for lots of other pieces of content. But, I think it's important to recognize that the way people consume content is evolving. and blogs and ebooks aren't necessarily, they're definitely not the only and aren't necessarily the best way to do it. Just think about how many experts are out there on LinkedIn just sharing their own thought leadership with LinkedIn posts, polls, images, shared on LinkedIn, and other types of things. People are doing similar exciting things on Instagram and so on. So it starts with your passion, and then just literally, how are you going to share your expertise in that passion over what medium? And then just finding some way to make sure you're doing it semi-consistently.
And I think to go alongside that, because of so many mediums, you have to test a few of those too before you dive in, right? Because you might not know completely where your buyer is going to be. You don't want to spread yourself too thin by any means, but
sure, right.
A LinkedIn post might be the right place.
Yeah.
But
if you're selling IT security software, you should test TikTok before you go all in on TikTok.
Yes,
On the other hand, for most B2B companies, LinkedIn's still probably a pretty safe bet.
Yes, absolutely. So you brought this up in your introduction, but obviously, you co-founded Marketo, you went on to Engagio before Demandbase acquired Engagio. So you moved from marketing automation into ABM. Now, what do you see as being next for B2B marketing? Is there a next?
There's always a next, right? I do think we're going to see kind of an evolution of platforms. Right now, most companies are feeling like they need to buy a marketing automation platform and an ABM platform. The marketing automation kind of handles your traditional demand gen and your lead-based stuff, as well as, and then the ABM platform handles more of your outbound, your account-based stuff, and that kind of thing. But the reality is there's overlap between these platforms. And I know Forrester and many other pundits are predicting that we're not that far away from starting to see some convergence between these platforms into what I think is going to be called just a go-to-market platform. Right. So we won't have separate ABM and marketing automation platforms. We're going to have go-to-market platforms. And, I think some other interesting attributes of these go-to-market platforms is that they're bigger than just marketing. We're already seeing that with ABM. There are more sales users of Demandbase than there are of marketing users. And so these go-to-market platforms are going to really be serving the revenue function, not just the marketing function. They're going to bring data as well as applications and software, because as machine learning becomes more important and just data becomes more important, that's an essential component of solutions like these. And I think the other just thing I'll say about go-to-market platforms is I think we're going to also see more of an inclusion of what I call the human touch, especially for the most important accounts. Just think about the power of an email, right? You are way more likely to read and respond to an email that comes from a human and a person than one that comes from a marketing automation system. So how do we tap into that power of the human touch, but at greater scale in order to really deliver personalized, relevant, interactions? I think AI and things like generative content will also play a big role here to kind of create personalized emails. We're already seeing pieces of that in like some startups, but it'll come together into these go-to-market platforms.
Rafi, and I hope that's the right way you pronounce it, said the mega malls of SaaS called what you just brought together. So, and you brought this up a couple questions ago, but like you said, we can all acknowledge we're in some form of a downturn right now, whether it's a full-on recession or not. What is your advice for weathering that? I know you talked about, being smarter with how you get your work done and things of that nature. But do you have other advice on how to weather the downturn?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously probably one of the most important topics of our time. And so some generic, so yes, work smarter, not harder. Use account intelligence to really focus your efforts on accounts that matter. I made those points. I think as in any time in marketing, understanding your buyer really well matters a lot. So this classic advice for CEOs from Jason Lemkin that says, if you don't know what to do, go talk to a customer. Anytime you're stuck at, as a CEO and you're, gosh, I don't know what to do. He says, go get on a plane and talk to a customer. Now just go talk to a customer. So just really focus, investing in understanding your buyer, being buyer focused, super generic advice. Marketers don't always follow it. And in a downturn, it becomes even more important than ever. Simplify what you can. I had one CMO I was talking to that, she literally blew up every meeting in the department and said, they're all gone. And now let's figure out, now organically, we can figure out what needs to kind of come back. She did the same thing with her Google pay-per-click campaign, like delete all the campaigns, start fresh. And she found better results. So simplify where you can. At Demandbase, we've been really focused on leaning into our customer stories, having our customers tell for us why Demandbase is so great rather than us telling them, and leaning into something that we call Project Vital, which is not just customers saying why, gosh, Demandbase is good and all that, but why Demandbase is essential to the running their businesses, and quotes for things like, man, if we took Demandbase away from our sales reps, we'd have a riot on our hands. Because and that's the stuff that's gold, especially in a downturn, because we want to really convey to people that this is the essential tool that you really need, to be successful. Just two other thoughts on a downturn. The default motion for most companies is to cut investment in marketing and to spend less in marketing. There's a lot of research, though, that says the companies that thrive the best on the other turn of the side of the outcome are companies that actually find ways to invest in the future. Now, I'm assuming most people on the call are not CEOs making the budget investment decisions, but are marketers. So A, you can obviously bring that data to your CEO, but B, this is where focus can matter, right? Because if you can really just focus your marketing onto the accounts that really, really matter for you, you can stand out. And remember, all your competition, not just your competition, not just your direct competition, all the competition that's out there for your buyer's attention, they're having their budgets cut too. So last year, it was really hard to reach our buyers and to get their attention because it was so darn noisy. Next year, it's actually going to be easier than it has been in a while to reach our buyers. And that's why investing during a downturn can be so important, because you can actually have disproportionate impact and stand out. But if you can't do that for every account, do it for the ones that really matter to you, and you will stand out better during a downturn. And then last but not least, during a downturn, you just got to remember to focus on culture, your internal team. When everything's going gangbusters and you're growing like crazy and you're hiring and there's new people to welcome to the team every week and people are getting promoted to be managers and like everybody's excited, that's kind of easy times for managing culture. When everything's flat and we're not hiring for a little while, it's harder than it's been to achieve some of our goals, and we are being asked to do more with less. That's when leaning into culture really matters. Whether it's appreciating people, having fun with people, making sure people have development and growth plans. These are all things that I think really, really make an impact, not just in marketing, but in general.
Another reminder, again, just for people that may have joined late, if you do have a question for John, make sure you either drop it into the Zoom if you're on Zoom or into LinkedIn Live so that we can make sure John answers it for you. What are, and this may play into the economic downturn a bit, but what are the KPIs that are important to you today? And can you touch on why those are critical?
Sure. I will say, I don't think the KPIs that I really care about are, frankly, all that different than in a downturn than they are any other time. Like any good executive, like any good marketer, yeah, you should really make sure you're paying attention to the metrics that the business cares about. Revenue, bookings, net dollar retention, gross margin, profitability. These metrics are what your CFO cares about and your investors care about. And ultimately, that means as a marketer or even a salesperson, you better care about those things too. Now, working backwards, you don't have as much direct impact on those goals. But where marketing then, really should pay a lot of attention to is on pipeline. There was something going around on LinkedIn maybe a month and a half ago or 2 months ago. Like, if you only had one metric, what one metric would you look at? And I said it's total pipeline creation versus plan or versus goal. So if you unpack that, there's a couple of really key things in there. The first is that you have a goal that is set, hopefully based on some math and science, of really understanding how much pipeline is needed to be created in order to achieve your long-term outcomes that you care about. That's built on an understanding of win rates and deal cycles and all that kind of thing. And then the number one metric is, are you creating that enough pipeline? And that's from every source, because back to the soccer team analogy, it's not, hey, the halfback, this is a halfback goal and that's a fullback goal, that's a striker goal. Like, the scoreboard doesn't have different numbers for all those different people. There's one goal, right? Like, you scored this many points. And the same thing matters. In a team-based effort where you're all touching the ball at some point, the number one metric needs to be just, did we as a team create enough pipeline? Now, that doesn't mean, if you peel back the onion, that you're not also tracking individual performance. But it's not for kind of the top level dashboard. That's for coaching and performance improvement and things like that. So from the sort of total pipeline goal, then what I look at, which really now gets into just kind of the world of marketing, are what are the precursor metrics, the leading indicators that marketing has more direct influence over to really help drive that pipeline number. So the things I look at include what we call a sales qualified meeting to opportunity, to pipeline, and that conversion rate, because that's a key factor of pipeline generation. Working backwards from there, I'm going to look at, marketing generates both marketing qualified leads and marketing qualified accounts. In both cases, this is something that's sort of saying marketing is generating some level of engagement or activity that's worthy of a sales follow-up, right? Well, I want to look at how those are performing. Are they getting followed up on properly? Are they converting into meetings and then ultimately into pipeline? Even higher up the funnel, I look at things just like, how many campaign responses are we getting from the right people, the right accounts? That nuance there is pretty important. It's not just, hey, I had 50 people show up at my webinar. It's, I had 22 people that were the right personas from the right companies show up at that webinar. So that kind of qualified response metric becomes really important. I look at act nows. This is people coming to our website and actually saying, I would like to get a demo. I'd like to talk to a salesperson. I'd like to buy, or whatever. That's just obviously great for pipeline generation. And is also, I think, a good proxy for building our brand. And that the self-service buyer stuff is working. And last but not least, I look at just traffic to the website. Are people typing demand, and particularly direct traffic? Are people typing demandbase.com into a browser? Because that's a poor man's version of a brand awareness metric. If I'm increasing the number of people who are typing demandbase.com into a browser, it means generally that my brand awareness is going up. So that's a little bit of a laundry list of a bunch of the kind of the key dashboard metrics we look at. The only other piece that I would say that I look at in terms of key metrics then is the investment efficiency behind those metrics. And that is even more important in a downturn. So I'm talking about how much investment do I need to make in marketing to generate $1 of pipeline, for example. And the nuance here is you may notice I'm being pretty precise in my words. I'm not talking about cost per lead or cost per opportunity. I never want to use the phrase cost per, because that conveys to the world that marketing is a cost center. I'm always talking about investment efficiency, investment in pipeline. But marketing is something that we can and should invest in. And I think the language matters. Those are my key metrics.
Right as I was taking a sip of water. What keeps you up at night? I think it's a question that a lot of people get answered, but from someone that's a CMO and has, been through a lot throughout, or seen a lot throughout their career, what currently keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to answer this one in the context of what currently keeps me up at night, like this quarter, because it changes all the time for different things. But I'll be pretty candid and vulnerable with the answer. I just finished telling you about how I think it's really important to focus on the total pipeline creation and not get into the weeds of marketing generated this, and attribution. I also told you attribution is kind of bogus and that you can't really use that to sort of justify and improve marketing. So I think all those things are well and true, but it does have the impact of weakening marketing's argument a little bit when it comes time to defend your budget. Put it another way, back at Marketo, when it was this very linear lead-based model, and I could say marketing generated that opportunity, I had a pretty direct tie that said, if you give me this much money, I will generate this much pipeline that will generate this much revenue. With this model that's more dynamic, more of a team-based effort, that tie is a lot weaker. And as a result, I worry both for me and my team, but also for our customers and other marketers out there, how can we go to the CFO and the CEO and the board and justify that our budget needs to be 20% more next year? In this kind of team-based world, how do we justify that investing in marketing is just as or more important than investing in more sales reps or more SDRs when you're thinking about it with this kind of team-based dynamic? It keeps me up at night because honestly, I don't know the answer. I'd like to.
Knowing that, what's keeping you up at night, what is, if you're still searching for the answer, so that's a hard part, but what advice can you offer to others that may be facing a similar challenge, even if it's not that exact one?
Yeah, I'll share what I'm trying to do myself so far, right? And first off, I'm looking at a lot of just ratios. For example, one of the things that I'm looking at is what is the ratio of the marketing investment to the total sales and marketing investment? Because sales and marketing is a number that investors look at. It's built into, if for a SaaS business, metrics like the customer acquisition cost or the CAC ratio. So effectively, if there's a pie of sales and marketing, what's marketing's share of that pie? And KeyBank, which is an investment bank, publishes every year some really good benchmarks for SaaS companies. And one of the things they published one year is data about, hey, for different companies, different go-to-market models, how big is that marketing share of the pie? And what you see is that it ranges between about 20 to 40%. And more at some companies, but that's kind of the core slug. So one of the ways that I'm thinking about defending the budget is just like, well, you know, what percentage of the pie is marketing? And, you know, we should probably keep that percentage of the pie somewhat consistent. You know, similarly, ratios for like investment to pipeline. You know, if we spend, you know, 10 cents to get $1 of pipeline last year, sure, let's try to improve somewhat, right? But I'm not going to suddenly start generating pipeline by you know, at only 5 cents. You know, like just businesses don't get that much you know, more efficient that much faster. So, but maybe we aim for 8 cents. You know, so kind of just thinking about kind of reasonable quarter over quarter and year over year improvements on efficiency and other kind of ratios. So that's how I'm thinking about it. It's hard. Again, anybody who's listening that has thoughts, I would love to hear from you. Hit me up on LinkedIn. And let's, you know, I think this is the really a key thing to be trying to solve.
What excites you and or terrifies you about the future? I kind of feel like we're talking about challenges and things that are keeping you up at night, but what terrifies you about the future right now?
Yeah, you know, I figured with this one I'd get out of marketing and just, you know, again, kind of can vulnerably share what I think about. And at the risk of kind of getting maybe a little too political, share just some of my thoughts on the world. You know, but like I worry, you know, and to the point of get terrified times, that I don't know if the future world is going to be better for my kids than it is for me. You know, and for generations and generations, you know, that's the hope of parents, right? That the world's better for my kids than it is for me. And you work to try to achieve that for your kids. And I feel like this generation, my generation, may be one where like it's going the other way, you know, for our kids. And that's because of things like global warming, because I worry about things like, you know, just around the world, you see, you know, more authoritarianism, you know, rising in different kind of political veins, plus obviously things that can come out of the blue, right? You know, we just, you know, a global pandemic, you know, turns out those happen sometimes. You know, big existential risks like, you know, rogue AI. I mean, these things can potentially have the impact of, you know, affecting the world. You know, I think about what's going on with Ukraine and, you know, that there's 4 million people living without power as it's starting to snow, you know, and like, that's, you know, the world, you know, and how do we kind of stop that kind of stuff? So all that stuff does scare me. I guess when I sort of want to get a little bit, I'm generally an optimist. And so when I get a little bit more excited about the world, I try to put on my hat of history and the long-term view of the evolution of mankind. And the long-term trend is generally progress, you know, better living standards, better quality of life, more freedom, more open societies, and that technology is a key driver of, and innovation is a key driver of a lot of that progress. So I am excited for what could come, right? New carbon capture technologies could dramatically change things, just as a simple example. So kind of two sides of that same coin.
LaRon, and again, once again, I hope I pronounced that correctly, but LaRon asked on LinkedIn, what books would you recommend, if any, to become better at marketing?
Well, you should definitely read a book called Unspam Your Brand, the definitive guide to smarter go-to-market with account intelligence. That's my book. It's a 260-page ebook that you can actually get for free off of the Demandbase website. But it literally has everything that I've learned over the years about how to build, you know, an ABM program and just generally a smarter go-to-market. It's not your typical marketing fluffy ebook. It's literally my textbook that I wrote for kind of marketing. So again, demandbase.com/guide to get that. So if that kind of shameless self-promotion plug out of the way, I think it depends kind of what marketing you're looking to do. So there's books like Jeffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm, which are Bibles for product marketing. There's Ann Hanley's Everybody Writes to sort of, learn about kind of content marketing, pieces, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's not a great kind of definitive book out there really for kind of demand generation. I think that's sort of more why like the best stuff out there are ebooks like mine. Yeah, so hopefully that helps at least a little bit.
As we wait just to see if any kind of last minute questions come in, are there parting thoughts that you have for everyone that has joined, anything that's just top of mind for you that may have come up throughout the day, or, as you knew this was coming up?
Oh gosh. I don't know. What just comes to my mind is just maybe because you got me thinking a little bit about, the world changing and all these types of things, and some of the hard things that are happening, and as we kind of approach a downturn, what comes to mind is just a reminder to be kind to each other out there. Like, a little kindness, no matter what, can go a long way. So
I guess, and I should have thought to ask you this one earlier, but Rev Genius is a private community of about 31,000 people or so. I know a big focus for you, because we talk about it a lot, is private communities, dark communities, kind of however you want to term it. When you think of it from your position as a CMO, why do you think they're so important right now for marketers to focus on, for marketing organizations to focus on?
Well, I think it goes back to the self-service buyer that we talked about. General, we know that people trust their peers and their networks more than they trust vendors, particularly more than they trust salespeople, at vendors. And so I think people are just generally wired to want to go find ways to learn about their category as well as vendors in the category, in these communities. Now, I'll be honest, you and I talk about, the revenue focused communities, and I think there are a decent number of them, including Rev Genius. I don't know, right? Like, if in healthcare software, are there an equivalent number of communities, out there where, the healthcare marketers are getting together? There's probably some, there may not be as many, but even if they're not formal communities that have Slack channels and Ask Me Anythings and all that, there are still informal networks of people who talk to each other, and so whether it's a formalized community or not, finding ways to just tap into, it's good old fashioned word of mouth eventually. I do think it's a really important part of marketing, and part of building a brand that is, well, here's an interesting, maybe this might be a controversial statement. PR got transformed because of content marketing. And a lot of PR agencies sort of turned into content marketing agencies. I wonder if brand is being similarly transformed by communities. Where building your brand isn't, just about Super Bowl ads and billboards, but really, what is your strategy for driving word of mouth in communities?
Yeah.
It's ultimately,
it makes a lot of sense.
And ultimately, you can't be there in every community. You won't succeed. And it's why building your customer advocates ends up becoming such a core strategy.
And you don't know all the communities potentially that exist that your customers may be in, right?
You won't ever have all of them, because again, many of them aren't even formal communities. They're just people hanging together at a barbecue.
Exactly.
And so the more you can invest in that customer advocacy, the better.
Awesome. Well, I know that the link to the book has been posted, at least in general chat here in Zoom. I know that it's being posted in LinkedIn. So
it's also on my profile.
As well as on your profile, of which the team has posted as well. So thank you for taking the time. I know it's not the easiest thing to find time on your calendar, because I'm the one that has to try to do it occasionally, but
well, good.
Thank you for taking the time to do this. Hopefully it was helpful to everyone that joined.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.